I'd like to call to order the planning workshop of the Keel Island Planning Commission, September 8th, 2021, at 3 p.m. Could you call the roll, please?
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Mr. Stinson. Mr. Daddy.
Here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Iwan. Ms. Kay.
Ms. Madeline, can you respond?
Ms. Dashus.
Ms. Madeline, Mr. Stinson, can you hear us?
I'm here.
Well, we maybe have some technical difficulties, but this is the first workshop we've ever had. It's a new experience. We're looking for input from the public to help guide us in our work with the applicant to potentially come up with a proposed plan development for Andell West. Yesterday, Town Council gave first reading to the annexation of the land at issue. Today is the first look for the community at the planning that's gone on by Riverstone Properties. So I will call on Jeff Galante of Riverstone Properties to walk us through some of their thinking on this property. Thank you, Jeff.
Hello. Yep.
Thank you.
Barely.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Galante. I'm here with my partner, Chris Carrata, and our land planner, Mark Permar. Chris and I are employees of Riverstone Properties, which is the family property arm of the Goodwin family. The Riverstone Group is the holding company. We are affiliated with the Keel Island Golf Resort. I think most of you know of our stewardship and investment on the island, and I would hope that you all view it as a overwhelming positive. We certainly think it is, and have been very pleased with our partnership with the town and the residents, and look forward to continuing that. A little bit about how we got here and why we're here today. So I think by now most of you are aware of the plan, which is why attendance is so strong for this event. The reason we are here is really, the genesis of it is we have a potential retail deal, specifically a grocery deal. to go on the land that we've identified as Andell West, just south of Freshfields, in between Freshfields and Kiowa Island proper. Because of that deal, which is real and viable and which we are intending to move forward with, presuming we can get the entitlements and the approvals needed to move forward, we wanted to plan holistically for the area. There's infrastructure that would go in to bring that retail to fruition. There's sewer considerations, stormwater considerations, utilities, et cetera, that would be costs borne by us to put that in place. We looked at this as an opportunity to plan for the area immediately around it. The property is currently zoned in Charleston County as R4, meaning we can have a density of 4 units per net acre, net high acre. We didn't view that as necessarily appropriate for a modern grocery anchored retail area. We wanted something that might be more of a community village, something that has a little more modern thinking, knowing that our overwhelming priority would be to do something of the quality consistent with our resort investments on the resort, the sanctuary, our golf courses, the other improvements with which you're all familiar. The only portion of our plan which is, I would say, set in stone, or which we know with certainty that we want to proceed on, is that grocery. The balance of it is something that we want to work with the town on, the residents, and come up with a plan that makes sense for everyone. We need to establish a baseline zoning, baseline approvals, so that we know what we can do there. But I think it's important to reiterate that quality will be the overwhelming driver of anything we do there. I would like to point out one thing that we were made aware of this morning that I think should be addressed. It sounds as though there is a rumor that Riverstone was seeking to rezone the entirety of our Andell tract, which is 500 acres around Freshfields, that we were seeking to rezone that to R6, which would allow us for 6 units per acre. I want it made clear that was a Charleston County initiated process. That is something that Charleston County staff did. We were made aware of it at the same time a number of interested citizens were. So I think it's very important to note that was not something we were seeking. Charleston County was looking to have pockets of concentrated density throughout the county and have more rural areas and concentrate their density in those particular areas. So that's a brief introduction of who we are, why we are here. I'm going to turn it over to Mark Primar, our land planner, who can go into a little more detail about the plan itself. Thank you.
Very good, thanks. Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and those in attendance today, again, my name's Mark Primar. I see some familiar faces from yesterday. I've been asked to outline the basic elements of the Planned Development District recommendation, or not recommendation, but the application. If you remember yesterday, we strayed away from that because the topic was annexation in terms of the process, but today is the best platform. Our intent is to outline the basic elements first, take some questions from the commission, and then dig a little bit deeper into a couple of detail points of some exhibits, and then we look forward to open questions after that. So let me make certain that everyone understands the location and sort of scale of the property. Now, there were some exhibits that were out front. I hope most of you grabbed those, because we're going to refer to a couple of those, or you might look at them later on. The property in question is this outlined property right there on the aerial photo. And for all of us, the reference is if we were coming from northern part of Johns Island and headed toward Freshfields, we went all the way around 3/4 of the way, and then we're headed toward Kiowa in this location. The property starts just slightly beyond where that entrance to Freshfields is, the entrance off to Freshfields off of the Parkway. And it wraps around that corner to a point where, for many of us, it's probably muscle memory now, but there's a wetland that sort of spans on both sides of the Parkway in terms of that location. It's super high tides, you see water in there, and other tides, it's classic upland marshland area. There is a common property line between this section along here and Freshfields Village in that location. And then the property line continues on the Parkway, and then there's a shared property line or boundary with Cacique. If you see on the aerial photograph, you see actually the best indicator for Cacique is the golf course at the lower right. The entrance to Cacique is in this location. And then there's a specific location at the extreme west, at the lower left, that sort of joins this common property line. The total of the property is a little over 82 acres in area, of which about 72 acres of that is high ground. And the best way you can define the high ground is, and it really depends upon what's your earliest moment of going down the Kiowa Island Parkway. So for a lot of us that were during the 70s, or there might even be some people earlier than the 70s, these were large, open, extremely productive agricultural fields. I can still remember Betty Stringfellow giving me tomatoes from this area in here that were the best tomatoes in the world at the time before they moved off of Island. But now we know it as a place that has been the platform for large parking areas for major sporting events. Obviously the PGA tournaments, but other sporting events that occur throughout the year that the resort sponsors, such as the marathon or the triathlon, a lot of times those are all parking areas out in here or staged areas. So I hope that gives you a sense of the place. It's been largely farmed over almost 150 years. The only remnants of a natural framework is along the marshland on the south side here, and to a lesser extent along the right-of-ways, all of which are embraced in the planning process. These would be protected areas. Part of the annexation process requires a specific plat of record. It was not until just shortly before the submission to the town for the annexation petition that plat process was approved by Charleston County. And there was a reference earlier on that this property is presently within the unincorporated area of Charleston County and is the R4 designation, as Jeff indicated. That is not only 4 units per acre, but it's a very specific housing type. It's single-family detached. So you can't even have attached housing like duplexes. It's all single-family detached of lot sizes of a certain type. All right, now this is the part where we download the basic elements of the proposal, the basic structuring principles. So on the high ground, what is being proposed in a series of sort of a comprehensive whole, as Jeff has pointed out, a specific commercial area, then a transition where commercial and residential can coexist. That is maybe some residential above commercial or woven tightly with a commercial, and then more designated commercial areas. So if you can follow with me, this is Freshfields again, right here. And one way you can define Freshfields is not only the entry points right there off of the Parkway or right here off of the roundabout, but you know that large lagoon or lake area, that actually splits the property between Freshfields and the holdings of Riverstone. That was designed and built as a comprehensive whole to be part of a future master drainage system. So it sort of serves both properties, and then you'll see later on when I describe the basics of a master drainage system for this parcel. But let me start first with the commercial. So in this position right up in here, which is approximately 15 acres, that's the sort of core area of this proposed commercial activity. And when I say the lead story, as Jeff has indicated, is a new progressive in the sense that it's a 21st century version of grocery store. Not that we haven't loved dearly the grocery store that we have, but this is, more thoughtful in terms of the organization of the grocery store, and then related community retail sales and services. Now, my reference to community is not that there may not be select apparel shops or that sort of thing, but it's mostly governed by community basic needs in terms of our greater community of Southern Johns Island, Seabrook, and Kiowa. In this position, right in here to the right, which is a slightly orange color, you'll see two numbers, 2 and 3. This is the area that I mentioned would be the opportunity, if it made sense going forward, to have a more woven relationship between proposed residential and retail in that location. Similar to opportunities that you'll see in other coastal areas where residential and retail sales and services are woven tightly. Those evolved over decades, if not centuries, as places of settlement. We see the opportunity to have a little bit of that character, more intimate in terms of that. And the balance of these sort of yellow areas right here, right there, right there, right there, and here are dedicated areas for alternative types of housing. That is, there's inherently nothing wrong with single-family detached, but we think the opportunity that exists here is some level, some density pattern that's appropriate as we evolve together, what the plan should be, alternatives to housing types, some townhomes, some flats. That would be evaluated as the idea progresses, as you begin to understand the basic elements of market opportunity. But the real reason this makes sense in a position like this is it's an efficiency of organization for residential types. That is, you can actually end up with more open space. So what you'll see is this framework of green that wraps around all of these residential areas. And that's not including the green space that would be within the residential areas, but dedicated areas that are not only along the edges, but sort of permeate through that. Great opportunity for trail systems. So one of the things that we're proposing, and the town actually suggested it very early on in their sort of take of questions, is how can we connect to the existing trail system that's established along the parkway, right in here? We can connect in multiple locations there, as well as pathways that could lead to access not only to this future commercial, but more importantly, fresh fields. The opportunity for connectivity like that, such that you sort of evaporate the property lines of all that, and it feels like a whole community. What's great about this is it meets the classic 5-minute walk distance that for Americans are compelled to get into a car if you have to walk longer than 5 minutes. So the idea is that you don't feel like you have to get into a car to go over to fresh fields. In other areas, you'll see these blue areas, which are symbolic of a master drainage system that would be comprehensive to the whole, that all is tied together and feeds into this massive system that is shared between fresh fields and the future areas for consideration on Riverstone Holdings. The proposal is to take an area that is presently scheduled for R4, which would allow for up to 288 dwelling units. This proposal is at the beginning of an idea to be digested by all is 500 dwelling units, but it's multifamily. That is, there's compression and more efficient use of the land, and as I said, more retention of open space through multifamily purposes. So what I might do right now, well, one last item that I didn't point out is right in that location right there, which is number 5, which is sort of central to the residential, is a proposed location of at least 2 acres for a central amenity for the residents in this specific area. Again, short walk distance and easily accessible, and sufficient land set aside to have a substantive amenity, not just your little apartment pool complex, but something that is progressive in thinking. So maybe the best thing for me to do right now is to maybe stop and address any questions that the commission might have.
Well, actually, Mark, I was considering letting the public make comments.
That's fine. Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that would
So
be
anyone that has a question at this stage before I go into greater detail?
So anyone in the public, if you would like to comment at this point in the presentation, please step up to the microphone, state your name and address, and your comments.
Just have a quick question. Comment.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Jill Bushkoff. I live at 62 Salthouse Lane. How many stories are the plan to be for the apartment? And is it possible to, if it's more than like 1 or 2 stories, to push it further back so it's not so close to the road for aesthetic purposes?
Both good comments and questions. The proposal is to allow for up to 4 stories over parking. This is a residential type that it benefits by having parking under, again, retention of far more open space. And the allowance for going up to 4 stories over parking is that then over the whole of the project, you can begin to vary height. And I think your comment about how to position or set back appropriately from either marsh edges or roadways is appropriate. I don't have a figure in mind, but the concept of layering the height and pulling back where is appropriate. I don't have an exact dimension right now for that, but I'll make note of that going forward. So I hope I answered your question. Okay.
Ma'am?
I think I can.
Thank you. It's technology overrules everything.
Yeah, I have a question. You mentioned a grocery store. Oh, sorry, Karen Madoff, 47 Crested Flycatcher. You mentioned the commercial or retail area and how it would, grocery store, got that. But of the other retail entities being targeted towards, what the needs are of Johns Island and Kiowa and so forth, could you be a little more specific about what you see as what we need and how you are targeting it? Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, I don't want to presuppose that we know everything that the greater community needs. So there would be an outreach to listen and assess, whether it's a classic market study or, there are all sorts of means for really learning and listening to community needs. My comment about an emphasis on that, not to the exclusion of specialty stores, but is that as our greater community evolves, I'm speaking as a resident now, there are needs for basic community services that would benefit by having a central location like this. So whether it's the equivalent of like the postal station or service providers where they can be in this location as opposed to some other remote location that's easier for residents to go to. It's that type of thing that I'm trying to communicate. But again, what we want to do is listen to what people's needs are and where those opportunities exist. Again, I'm just speaking as a resident and trying to minimize the number of trips that I have to go a lot further in to conduct the business. So I didn't answer your question fully because that's a responsibility for us to find out more about what those are. In the listing of uses that you'll see later on, our intent, it looks like we're trying to list too many uses, but we want to make certain we've got covered those one-off uses that might be needed in a location like this that aren't presently serving the community.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Betsy LaForce. I am with the Coastal Conservation League. We heard outreach from several residents over the weekend and submitted a letter for yesterday's meeting that was not read into the record. So I just wanted to take a moment to raise a couple of our concerns about the proposed development so far. We are opposed to the annexation request. An additional large-scale mixed-use development of this nature and this high intensity would place an undue burden on the transportation infrastructure. We know that's an existing concern of many residents and was on the agenda yesterday, conversations around the need for a traffic study and some of the accidents that have happened recently, along with plans for the medical facility, the senior facility coming online to Seabrook here soon. As we've heard, approving the annexation to this PUD zoning would open the door for a whole myriad of uses, higher intensity development. Under the current R4 zoning, we've heard some references to these ideas of progressive 21st century development. One of the points I wanted to make is a lot of that sort of thinking now needs to take into consideration environmental conditions, namely marsh migration, sea level rise. We're living in a current reality today of a warming climate. Sea levels are rising, and Charleston County has taken the initiative to adopt a resilience element into the comprehensive plan. I serve on that committee along with some of my colleagues, and part of what we are tasked with doing is looking at ways that Charleston County can implement new ordinances or approaches to addressing some of these issues, specifically marsh migration. So when I look at this rendering, I see development all the way up to the critical line and marsh area. And when we're thinking about 500 plus units versus 288 units under Charleston County's existing zoning, we can imagine 288 units being clustered, like we've heard some of these good ideas mentioned and described, giving way for a lot more open space than a little bit of trail connectivity and a little bit of open space around the residential, and certainly appreciate the sentiment for community needs, basic community needs, postal service, that sort of thing. But it's important to keep in mind this area on the southern tip of Johns Island is a rural area, and that sort of comes with the territory here. So I think the basic needs of the community at large go certainly beyond some of this upscale commercial development that we are seeing here. So wanted to point out specifically a little bit of data on the marsh migration front. Sea level rise projections for our area are showing water levels rising 2 to 4 feet by the end of the century. So again, just take a look at this rendering. Imagine marsh migration as sea levels are rising. Marsh is projected to migrate landward. So it's really important as we're thinking about these planning decisions to take that into consideration and understand some of the larger conversations that are taking place regionally to start to implement those considerations. So we would respectfully urge the Planning Commission, Town Council to deny the annexation request. If the Planning Commission should decide to approve the request, we would strongly encourage to only allow for the same density under Charleston County zoning, land use, and development regulations that are existing today. So thank you so much.
Hello. My name is Cindy Amon. I'm currently at 3569 Shipwatch on Kiowa, and I just have a few questions from the land perspective. Is this currently a legally divided parcel, a legally subdivided parcel? The land that we're talking, the 82 acres? Oh, yeah.
Yes. In fact, the action of council yesterday could not have taken place unless that had been legally platted.
Thank you. My next question is, you mentioned, and I've seen on the map as well, that you guys own 500 acres in the area, and this is only 82 acres. So my concern is, what's going to go on with the rest of that acreage? And is this the tip of an iceberg? Can any restrictions be placed on development there? That would, yeah.
My answer today is the balance of the land, if this were to be rezoned to some capacity, but if the balance of the land is zoned R4 and it has to meet all those standards, there are no present, Jeff may want to address this, but there are no present plans for development in the balance of the area. If there is something outside the limits of what is presently permitted, the owner applicant would have to go through a process not unlike what we're going through right now, to change any of those conditions.
So just doing quick math, of the approximately 500 acres, we're going to be, you're looking to annex 82, and then the remainder of the almost 400 would be open to development under the R4. We still could end up having a heck of a lot more homes there.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I guess you're on deck.
John Zalogar, 5528 Frisco Lane. I'd like you to address two issues, the 500 versus the 288 houses and the apartments in terms of having use of apartments.
I'm sorry.
The 500 versus the 288 houses
Right,
and apartments as one of the uses.
right.
If you could address both of those?
Well, let me try. Just in case, all right, in case. The R4, I've tried to explain, that is limited to not just residential,
Right.
but single-family detached. You
Right.
can't, all right. The proposal is for R3, and if you look at we're going to look at it in a short while. The R3 allows for not only single-family, but it allows for duplexes, it allows for multifamily. Now, multifamily can take many forms. It could be for sale multifamily, it could be for rental multifamily, but multifamily in general for most of us is, multiple floors with multiple units within a building. There's not, I'm sorry.
In terms of quantity, total quantity?
Well, the proposal is for up to 500. This proposal represents up to 450 of the multifamily category, and up to 50 townhomes. Now, for example, if there's a decision in the evolution of the idea, and let's assume those numbers right now. The numbers may change through the process. There may be an uptick on townhomes, which is lower density, and a downtick in the apartments or the multifamily. So the composition of how that's determined in the future would be based upon market analysis and preferences for opportunities that might exist. And for those of you that are on Kiowa, it's not unlike a lot of other multifamily parcels where there are variations in what you actually can do. So I don't know if I answered that question.
Not at all. The real question is, why not maintain the total number of dwelling units at 288, regardless of the type?
Okay, well, I apologize. So everything that's going to be mentioned today, as well as questions, is going to be considered. So I can't answer that question right now, that why not just keep it at 288 or something close to that versus or hold true to this line. The purpose of this process is for all of us to cross-share, and not only are we keeping notes, but we're listening and looking into your eyes. So I think that's yet to be determined, how that might be considered, where there might be an alternative, a hybrid, that is something in between the proposal right now and what is existing right now. So that's the best answer we can give.
So, I guess it's a question for the Planning Commission then. Does that mean we should expect another workshop in another month to go over all these possible changes?
That's possible.
How else would it be accomplished if we didn't have a working, the gentleman just said there might be a lot of changes.
Well, certainly, if there are changes, the planning commission will address them.
In a workshop, so that
In a
the public, with
workshop,
public,
sure.
okay, that's what. So the other question is then apartments. You want to address I think it said condo/apartments. Do you want to address that?
Okay, the format of the multifamily is not decided. It's just not decided yet. Whether I think we might as well use the words, right? Whether they're rental or for sale. Are they owner occupied or are they rental occupied? That has yet to be determined. At this stage, what's being proposed is the intensity of use. The intensity of use, not the form of occupancy. It's the intensity of use in terms of, I'm speaking planarese now, density patterns, that sort of thing. So your question can't be answered yet because that would be part of the formative stage of listening to our session today and other sessions, as well as an assessment of market opportunity. So that, and again, that's the best answer I can give today.
Brad Belt, 151 Bobcat. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I had submitted for the record a series of questions regarding process and the procedures being utilized by the Planning Commission and the council. I would hope at some point that either John or you all or council's council could address those. Because I think based upon conversations I've had, email exchanges, the Kiowa listserv, I think the one thing that really resonates is that this is a bass-backwards process. The cart is being put before the horse. And I do have some questions, and I won't get into all the procedural questions right now for the developer's representative. But the mere fact that we don't have any information about the planned development right now makes this process almost farcical. How are we to make any informed judgments? You would think, I would hope, that the developer would have come forward with a market assessment to say, we've surveyed residents, we've surveyed the community, these are services that aren't currently provided to the 2,000 full-time residents of the town of Kiowa and Kiowa Island that would be additive as a result of this process. None of that appears to have occurred. Yes, I think everybody wants a new grocery store. Do we need a whole host of other services, basically doubling the size of Freshfields Village? You say, well, we're not actually committed to that, but that's what you proposed. And the elephant in the room is not that this is kind of the beginning of a lengthy discernment process. You're pushing, the town council is pushing annexation. And the developer has requested, even though that doesn't seem to be consistent with the town ordinance or code, that the annexation is contingent upon approval of an unspecified mixed-use development of massive scale that would add about 50% more full-time residents if there were 500 apartments added to the town of Kiowa voter rolls, as well as a need for, obviously, then a lot of additional services. So the question, I guess, for the applicant is a couple. One, conceptually said that we're trying to solve for the needs of Kiowa Island, Seabrook Island, and Johns Island. You're seeking annexation. Why is I or anybody else as a representative of town of Kiowa, why should we be supplying the service needs for all of Johns Island here in the town of Kiowa?
Well, Jeff? No, let me take a shot at, if I implied that we were providing all of the service needs for all of Johns Island and Seabrook and Kiowa.
Not all the service needs. You
That's what I
service needs for Johns Island, Seabrook, and town of Kiowa.
That's what I heard.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you
Okay.
clarified that. I think we have all been amazed, if we were really honest with ourselves, about the acceptance and the growth of Freshfields Village. For those of you that were involved before Freshfields and sort of watched it watch it evolve, there was a lot of questions about whether that was going to really work or not. And I would like to think that in the quiet of the night, we would all agree that the response by our greater community about activity and support for that has been strong. That's clear evidence in my mind that goes beyond a market study. As our greater community, and when I use the word community, I'm not just speaking about Kiowa, I think of the whole area, we'd all agree that it's evolving, it's growing. Let's just pick Kiowa, the undeveloped lots that or the unimproved lots that are owned by other parties are being built on without even additional sales of new property. That's an example of growth and market opportunity. So the best answer I can give, short of Jeff giving a much better answer to your question, is even without a formal market study, people that are experienced in the business, like that team right there, who's incredibly experienced, understands the dynamic of the opportunity to provide services for our greater community. So, as I said, Jeff, you're going to have a better answer than I am.
And Jeff, I would welcome your input on that, but kind of more broadly related to that is why this process, pursuing application, why not first having the discussions and dialogue with the community, with the town, with the Planning Commission, to give everybody a sense of involvement and engagement and ownership in the process, trying to get buy-in, rather than you and the town council starting down a path where we learned yesterday this whole thing's supposed to be wrapped up in 6 weeks.
As to the process, all I can say is that it is very important to us, to Riverstone, to the Goodwin family, et cetera, that we remain good stewards of Kiowa Island and our residents and participation in this community. The process is one that we've worked on with staff, with council, with the commission. We view this as a interactive process. I mean, we're having the feedback right now. As I said at the outset during my comments, the only part which we consider rock solid, and I wouldn't say it's that until we know we have some surety on the politics of it, or whether we're coming to Kiowa or Charleston, is the grocery. Everything else we are talking to the community about. The units, like Mark said, all I can say is we know they will be Class A. Kiowa is our flagship. It is very important to us, to the Goodwin family, et cetera. We are not going to do anything that would jeopardize that. We have to start somewhere, knowing what we have and what we can do before we take those next steps. So the retail, if you were to ask me right now, is there demand for that much? I would say probably not. Retail has changed a lot. It was accelerated by COVID. We've gone from a much more of a hard goods and brick and mortar economy to a lot more services, a lot more delivery, et cetera. Those changes will continue. We know grocery is probably going to stay intact somewhat. It may change in terms of delivery and pick up, all those kinds of things. The services that revolve around those anchors, I think, will change. But we have to start somewhere with a baseline. But as to all of the other components, I think those are the kinds of things we want to work with the citizens and the elected officials on. I hope that helps.
Well, it does, Jeff. I think, at least from my, and again, I can only speak for myself, the starting the annexation ball rolling before having all these conversations, I think, is what's thrown an awful lot of people for a loop. And now we kind of wonder, what process are we following? And that gets into some of the procedural questions, because I don't know whether we're actually in the plan development review process and all of that's dictated by the town ordinances or code. Are we in a master plan amendment process? Are we in a map zoning amendment process? Are we still within the annexation process? Those actually, at least as I read the code just yesterday, don't seem to fit together very well, because there's a 30-day moratorium built into all of that. But shifting gears for a second, again, this may all make sense. Annexation may make sense. Maybe the development at some scale makes a lot of sense. I don't think any of us are in a good position to judge that right now. I think there's a pretty strong negative reaction to the scope and scale of what we heard about initially, at the very least. But also, and not questioning your stewardship through Kiowa Island Golf Resort, but also as I read, when you hear about this plan, how is it at all consistent with all the marketing that Kiowa Partners and KIRE have done, apart from KIGR, with respect to the nature and character of Kiowa Island, particularly the town councils, the town's housing study that was just completed last year that compared us to Palmetto Bluff, that compares us to Sea Island, to Sea Pines, and in some respects very favorably, others less favorably. None of those had any apartment units. They all had predominantly single family and some multifamily, and some had much lower levels of short-term rentals. But how this has been marketed is the antithesis of Hilton Head and Harbor Town. But that seems to be the direction that this would take us, something very different than, again, has been marketed separately. And I don't know if that's how KIGR has marketed it.
Well, all I will say is we are not out marketing this plan. We have to establish a baseline for what we can do.
I mean, marketing Kiowa Island.
Yes. Like I said, all we can do is give our assurance and show you our track record in terms of our stewardship of this place and what we would do. Chris and I would be in a lot of trouble if we were to propose anything to the corner office that jeopardized the quality of life or aesthetically for people of the island. I don't know what other kind of assurance I can give you at this point. Really, all we are trying to do as regards the residential at this point is establish a baseline. The kinds of studies you're talking about in terms of what those units would look like, that comes later. I see Roger Warren in the background here. He knows we are a deliberative, sometimes slow-moving body when it comes to what we do on our properties. We have one particular component of this project which we know is coming, potentially. The others we are going to study, we are going to do the right thing, but we have to establish a baseline.
Well, then, in that regard, a very specific question. Would Riverstone be willing to withdraw its annexation application or request a delay in its consideration until there's been ample opportunity for more workshops and public hearings, completion of the traffic study, submission of the market analysis, etc.?
I believe we were told the opposite, that it had to go that way. I don't think that was our decision. Who told you that?
Who told you that?
I think the town.
Who at the town? Based on what?
I don't know. So it is okay for them.
So I want to be clear about a few things. Today's meeting is a workshop. This is not required by the zoning code to have. This particular meeting was added in by staff to provide an additional medium to engage with the public. The requirements for our rezoning, for comprehensive plan amendment, text amendments, those things require a reading or a hearing from the Planning Commission, followed by council of 2 readings. So today's meeting is actually an additional meeting to engage with the public. Once that formal application is heard by the Planning Commission, that particular time, the Planning Commission will be able to take as much time as they need to vet the project, to vet the proposal, and that could take 1 meeting, 2 meetings. It's up to the Planning Commission to vet those details. So the timeline for a plan development, it really is married along with the details of when the Planning Commission and the applicant is able to work out a formal recommendation that they can then send on to Town Council. Town Council would then make that decision of first reading and second reading. So today's meeting is really, as far as public engagement, this is one of several meetings that take place. The formal application meetings regarding comprehensive plan amendment, text amendments, the public will still have opportunity to provide comments and input. Yesterday, after Town Council's annexation meeting, we did release communications regarding an additional portal for people to provide public comment on this particular proposal. It will be continued opportunities for the public to engage with this particular process. It's not sort of a start and stop, but it's a continual process that allow residents, property owners, any stakeholders to engage in the process.
I appreciate that, John. I'm sorry for monopolizing
I
everything,
think
folks.
you are kind of monopolizing.
Okay,
Why
I
don't we
am.
move on to-
So I'll let others speak. It's just I guess the final point is, and I know there are others that are developers in this room. These types of projects usually have a multi-month and multi-year gestation process to try to, hammer out all the details. And again, John, I know you mentioned maybe one more meeting, planning meeting. It seems like this is on a fast train to completion.
The one thing to realize, this is the zoning component. The level of detail that you would see in a site development plan, that would be done at the staff level. So a lot of issues that you would see worked out of, what is the building materials? Yes, those things can sometimes be inserted into a plan development, but that's really down the road and specified once a application is submitted for development. Right now, the process is really in the wheelhouse of working out the zoning specificities. So that's the land use, that's the height, that's the density. And so that's what the Planning Commission right now is working on with the applicant at this stage with the community, is identifying those major fundamental zoning related issues, the specificities of knowing the color of the building, how many trees on site. You will not get that at this stage of the planning process. And so that would come in time, but today, at where we are now at this workshop, I'm confident that the applicants are hearing all of the comments that have been made today, yesterday, and moving forward, that those things will be considered holistically in this approval process.
Thank you. Sir?
John Grierson, 109 Bobcat Lane. Just a couple questions. One, you have a burning need right now that you see as a business opportunity. Did you consider other methods to just take care of that and postpone all the rest of this till later?
I think at this stage, we're considering all of these issues. As Jeff pointed out, the highest priority is related to a specific part of the commercial activity. And starting yesterday, quite frankly, I think the process is working. What we're talking about is this is the process for sharing, and we've heard loud and clear genuine concerns about the impact associated with increased density. So I don't know if that was...
Well, so the second one is, as this annexation goes through, it is a land use, so it's an R3 type zoning. So that gets memorialized, and that density then becomes the by right for what can be built there whenever it gets built, right? So normally, at least generally speaking, it's harder to get more density, especially when you add commercial components, which is unusual because you're really changing the value of the ground. Secondly is, a lot of times in most planning today, density is consolidated into an area which is more efficient, but it also opens up a lot more open space and things like that. And I guess my thought to all that, I don't see any of that really in here. I see a lot more density, a massive commercial component where you've taken a piece of ground, elevated the value to the developer of that, and then by locking in the R3, basically giving them the right down the road to do what they want with it, because we'll be under some restriction at that point. I would really encourage far less density, especially if there's a commercial component put in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am? No? You've had your hand up for a while.
These are just kind of some general questions. My question is, what is actually the benefit to
Ma'am,
Kiowa?
can you-
Oh, what exactly
No,
is?
ma'am, your name and address.
Oh, I'm sorry. Cindy Amon, 3569 Shipwatch. What is
You've
the?
already spoken once.
Yes, I have.
Okay,
Can I speak again?
sure.
Okay, I'll be quick. What is just the bigger picture, what's the benefit to Kiowa in approving all this, other than two things, from what I can see? We get a better supermarket, and we're also allowed to have some input or control over this development. And knowing your background and how much invested you have in the area and the island, I can't believe that you wouldn't build something just as good, and that whether or not Kiowa approved it or not. So again, I just think that the density issue is probably what concerns most people. And, the whole traffic thing, that hasn't been addressed either.
Thank you.
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Sir.
Tom Weiser, 4673 Tennis Club Lane. After coming yesterday and also listening to the feedback today, I look at this a little differently. I look at this as a golden opportunity to partner with someone that we can trust and we know in the Gooden family. Now, I have the same problems with the density and the fact that the plan isn't fleshed out. But what I hear is that's what the process needs to entail. But I look at this as a way and an opportunity to reimagine the whole Kiowa Parkway from literally here down to the front gate and to the park. And by doing that and using this, maybe some of the financial benefits that the developer's accruing, because they have the same issue we all have. We just had 2 serious accidents in the last week. And soon it'll be a hotel guest or it'll be a guest of the resort. So I think everyone has a vested interest in this process and viewing it as an opportunity, if there's a true dialogue, to reimagine that whole parkway and access to the park. And the park, is one of 3 parks in the state of South Carolina that allows public access. I think the benefit to Charleston County is by providing greater access. Why not have a shuttle service to the park, say from this parcel, instead of having people try to go down there and park? When the thing is, I ride bikes through there every day when I'm here in Kiowa. I'm from Atlanta. But, basically there's so much demand for that by increasing some benefits to Charleston County, we're doing a service to our other neighbors. And at the same time, we're reimagining that whole parkway. And I see that as a great opportunity. And I can tell you one thing, of the people, I've been coming here for 40 years, of the people that I've seen, there's no one more responsible than the Goodman interest. What they've done on the island is remarkable in many regards. It's not perfect, but it's far better than some of the other options we've had. So I just think everybody needs to take a deep breath and let the process work its way through. And hopefully the Planning Commission and Council will take all this excellent input and collaborate it together into a plan that's very workable, not only for the 80 acres here, but the other 400 acres that they control in the immediate area.
Thank you. Ma'am. Or sir. I'm sorry.
Collie Farah, 992 Foxcroft Road. I'm here on behalf of the Kiowa Conservancy, and just wanted to raise a couple points, but really ask one ultimate question. But I know you're taking into account the needs of Kiowa, but it's also important to take into consideration what we don't need. And while we might need a grocery store, we don't need 500 new units to cause a lot more traffic. Secondly, why do people move here? It's because you can live within nature. You can have the wildlife. This is 82 more acres that goes away, takes away their safe travels and stuff. So what I would really like to see, or ask, well, while you're taking away this 82, you've got another 400 acres out there that could be developed and probably wouldn't. This is definitely going to happen. I hope it is smaller than what you propose here, but what I'd like to see and ask is, while you have 400 acres there that can still be developed, maybe consider putting those under a conservation easement, some parts of them, preserving them, keeping the wildlife a place to live, and keep Kiowa so natural in the way that we like to see it. So are y'all considering that at all, or would you?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, we certainly are going to be good stewards of the parcel. We are not interested in coming and mass grading and just selling out a bunch of lots. Like I said, we have a massive investment here, both emotionally and financially, and this place is our flagship. It's important to note this is not an agriculturally zoned tract. This is R4 zoned. We are not trying to take something that is, rural or, agricultural in terms of its zoning and propose more density. We viewed this as an opportunity to work with the town on a piece of land that is essentially at their front door on right-of-way that the town controls, and is in between a piece of land, Freshfields, that is part of the town and the balance of the town proper. We know that a massive part of people's interest in living in the low country is nature. We are very mindful of that. Certainly we are bottom line oriented. We are, a smart company. I don't think we would do anything to jeopardize that. We are mindful of the ecological importance of some of the characteristics of this property and the balance of our Andell tract. That's all I can say at this point.
Thank you, Jeff.
If I could, I'm sorry, if I could just add.
Yes, sir. Mark, I'm sorry.
Because first and foremost, the really strong suggestion about natural habitat and conservancy and so forth, I think we show evidence of taking that seriously. On this property, and I hope there aren't any farmers in the room here, but this has been substantially rendered void of a natural system for over 100 years through farming, and who knows what's in the earth out there. We think this is, in addition to the patina of existing natural habitat and a rather extensive tree canopy around the perimeter, especially on the marshland side, which is going to be preserved, we think this is an opportunity to demonstrate how large hundreds of acres of farm fields can be reconsidered and restored to a natural state in which there's symmetry with living in them too. So we're going to reach out to organizations like yours as to how to best integrate best practices with potential development, whether it's R4 or whether it's potential other activities on that. We take that as an encouragement to engage on that.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sir.
Hi, I'm Rick Papillo, 462 Vetch Court. Question for you guys. My wife and I know many other people are really anxious to get more retail and the right kind of retail in there that would help us with services. But since you've decided you want to double the amount of units, do you guys know who your target market is? Have you decided who that is? And is your ultimate goal to give them access to Keel Island?
I'm sorry, the last part?
Give them access to Keel Island once they get in here.
Again, Jeff might address the last part of that question, but I think I've already indicated that we have because of our long history, our collective long history of Kiowa in particular, but the immediate region and also over many decades, we believe we have a pretty sound understanding of the basic market opportunities and segments, but we don't rely upon past history. And we don't rely upon, we know it all right now. So as the project would unfold, additional market assessment would be done. Not just once for the first phase, and that's all you do. You do that constantly. You stay in tune with the market opportunity. That is not to suggest, as been pointed by others, we're presenting a target market study. We're not presenting one right now. We're presenting our best judgment based upon the experience that we've had by witnessing what's been happening in the immediate area. And it will be supplemented going forward. I forget the other part of your question, I'm sorry.
Access to the island.
Access to the island. Jeff, you might want to address that because that's come up a couple of times.
Yeah, just to go back on Mark's point in terms of the market study and specifics. As I've mentioned several times, we are not focused yet on specifically what this product would be or who the particular demand drivers are for it. We know it will be high quality, but we would view this as the start of our process in terms of what the product would ultimately be. In terms of access to the island, that certainly is not our intention. And that isn't something that comes with the petition we filed. But again, until we know more about the specific product we are proposing, we don't have more details than that.
You just can't say, no, there's not going to be access to cable?
Which particular access are you worried
Well, I'm
about?
talking about through the gate, to the island and to the amenities, anybody to the sandcastle.
I don't know that they'd be able to access the sandcastle. That is a Kika amenity, correct? Yeah.
That's a Kika property.
Yeah.
That's what I'm just asking, will they have
That-
access to the island for all the amenities on the island?
They may.
Sir?
I don't want to mislead you with specifics that we don't yet have. But that's,
Sir, yeah, come on. We're moving on, Jeff.
okay.
Hi, I'm Richard Benata from KRE. I live at 4309 Heads Point Court, and I kind of think I represent the soon-to-be disenfranchised in terms of this becoming an annexation. There's Seabrookers here, I would imagine. There are people who live on Betsy Carrison, et cetera. This annexation process worries us because we have equities and interests as residents of this area having to deal with what has become more and more of a problem of density and traffic and other situations such as what happens to the island in terms of getting access to the beaches and one thing or another. So my concern here is this annexation process. I'm asking you as an outsider, if you will, relative to Kiowa town, but an insider relative to being availing myself of the benefits of this area. Will you take into consideration the needs and the interests of the rest of the Sea Island area as you look at what you're doing? And this density issue is one of the key issues. And I would think it's a matter of great concern to many of us to see high density development here when in fact getting into and out of this area is becoming more and more of a difficult problem for everybody. So I'm just asking the board, this commission, whether your interests are to take into consideration other people's outside your actual town in dealing with this issue.
I believe we will, sir.
Well, I certainly hope you do.
Brad McElvain, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. Kind of following up on the last comment. Charleston County has done its own zoning, is in the process of a zoning and land development regulation ordinance review, and they were looking at an R4 to an R6 change in the Sea Islands. And it's my understanding that they're going to be recommending and going forward, it's not approved yet, that they're not going to go to beyond R4. So dealing with the issues of density that the county overall is looking at, I would ask you to be involved and talk to them and find out why they're making that decision, because I assume there are good reasons why they're making it. I'm also concerned if we go to a higher density here and then we need some support from the county and roads and things like that, they may say, well, we told you don't go to a higher density, and you went to a higher density. So it also begs the question also why the annexation. Is it because you wouldn't get wouldn't get the answer that you wanted in Charleston County, so you go to Toki? And that's a concern. So I just ask you to address that and try to make sure that that's a point. And I guess the other question I have is, if you don't know the use and the makeup of the people, how do we do traffic studies? How do we understand where people are going to go? Are they going to go onto the island? Are they not going to go onto the island? I mean, how do we do traffic studies for this whole thing?
Let me take an attempt at the last question in terms of traffic assessment. The three of us are not traffic engineers. We didn't even stay at a Holiday Inn Express to do traffic engineering. And so as is evident with all of the work that the resort does, The Riverstone group takes the lead on hiring professionals to do appropriate assessments. They have done that. It's been submitted to the town for review. We embrace the concept that was acted on by town council yesterday, I believe, of an even more comprehensive traffic assessment that goes beyond just what this proposal might be. I think it goes geographically, it goes the full length of the parkway from the roundabout to the main gate, Beachwalker Drive, as well as a certain run of Seabrook Island Road, because Freshfields borders Seabrook Island Road. So those professionals will share with us once they do that broader assessment. And as I said, we embrace the idea of this bigger picture assessment, not just this contribution. I think that's the only one I can ask or comment about in terms of the question.
Back there.
My name is Russell Berner, 286 Masters Court, full-time resident. I know very much what is happening here because I used to be a developer. I shouldn't be used to be a developer. I owned a construction consulting firm, made many presentations in front of people like you. So I understand something is going to be built, but I do hear that, and feel, something is going to be built that I think, hopefully, will be favorable to us. But I have a different angle about what's happening. And I have two words, preserve Kiowa. I attended the town council meeting yesterday, and obviously I'm attending the meeting here today. One thing I have observed in both of these meetings is one common desire: preserve Kiowa. It's not that we're against change, but one thing I've noticed in living here in about the year and a half is the love for the island and the love for the nature. And one thing that I am concerned about, we heard today that we're going to be increasing population by perhaps 50% of this is annexed. My concern is the annexation. We all within the gates of Kiowa, and I don't want to make this a group of people that don't want outsiders. It's not the case. My concern is that the love of nature within the gates of Kiowa. We're going to be adding a lot of residents and a lot of voters to the town of Kiowa. I'm not sure they're going to have the same feeling that we have of preserving Kiowa within the gates. That is my concern, and I'd like you guys to consider that, please.
Thank you. Ma'am.
That was perfectly in what I'm going to say. Thank you. First of all, and I'm going to read most of mine because it does have some math. I'm Diana Mezzanotte, 99 Reds Bluff. But first of all, I'd like to thank Bill Goodwin for helping to make Kiowa what it is today. It's an outstanding, one-of-a-kind community with a top-of-the-line resort and amenities through the Governor's Club that continue to keep our community one of the best in the nation. So I thank you for that. Personally, I don't have any concerns about whether the development will be aesthetically appealing or whether the resort will address safety, security, and our environmental concerns once they're identified. But my main concern is what Russ talked about, and that's voter dilution. And to illustrate the concern, I need to do some math. Currently, we have about 1,700 to 1,800 full-time residents of the island. Although some neighborhoods are outside the gate, they're all east of the bridge leading to the island. These are the only people that can vote in Kiowa right now. When the senior living facility, already part of town of Kiowa, is full, we will be adding 200 voters. Will the interest of these new voters be aligned with our current voters? In addition to this facility, the partners, not the resort, own property already in the town of Kiowa that they can develop. There will be somewhere between 120 and 180 units. There is potential for another 300 voters. Remember, that's already within the town of Kiowa Island. And will the interest of these voters be aligned with our current voters? If we annex this proposed development, we could have another 1,000 if we have 500 units times 2 people in each one, potential voters. will the interest of these voters be aligned with our current voters? Do the math, 200 from the senior living, maybe 300 from Freshfields, and up to 1,000 from this property, and there's already 1,500 new voters. We only have 1,700 to 1,800 voters in the town of Kiowa right now. This will not be the last annexation request. In fact, we'll probably have maybe 4 more. I think Cindy mentioned that we could have 4 more developments next, similar to this one. We would then have 200 plus 300 plus 1,000 times 3, which would be 3,500 new voters. Will all of these new voters be aligned with our current voters? This might take 10 years, but I've been here 40 years, coming here 40 years, and it's passed pretty quickly. So 10 years is nothing. So in summary, the issue before the Planning Commission is not whether we should accept the developer's proposal. It's whether or not we are prepared to accept a future with more Toki voters living off the island than on it. In the short term, we may gain some control over this development, but in the long term, we may be losing control of our small community. And I think that's a real problem. And there are 2 things also, that this isn't really a question, these are my comments. But there's one thing that colleague brought up here that I don't think anyone answered. He said the conservatory is wondering whether any of this additional 400 acres, you'd consider putting them into conservation easement. Yes or no?
There's no plans for us to do so right now.
Okay, so you're saying that you might. And then one other thing, and this was something that was on IKEA, and I thought somebody else would bring it up today, but it wasn't brought up, and I can't remember all the details. But there were some comments that there had been discussions already between the Goodwin Company and Charleston County about this land. And I just want to know, has there been some discussions with Charleston County already about this particular parcel of land?
Yes, it is in Charleston.
Well, but I mean, have you asked them questions about density and some of the questions that we have today? Have you already asked them some questions or gone before them and asked for some change, change in density to this project?
No, there was the R6 effort. It was a staff-initiated process.
Okay.
Where staff had recommended upzoning all R4 on Johns Island.
Which is what Brad talked about.
I tried to correct the record when I made my introductory comments. That was not led by us. We found out when a number of concerned citizens found out.
Okay.
That was not our effort.
All right. Well, my main concern, as I said, is about the dilution of voting, and I realize that may not be exactly within the scope of this group, but I think it's something that they need to consider overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Brian McEnany. I'm at 102 Goldeneye. I'm concerned about the vague aesthetics of this project. The way I see the variances that are being asked for, you're asking for the height to be a maximum of 55 feet. What is the tallest building on the island at the moment?
75 feet.
How much?
75.
And what is that, the sanctuary?
Yeah.
And how about in...
And the last windswept building.
And how about the in Freshfield Village? What is the tallest building there?
3 floors. 3 floors over.
3 floors being 35 feet?
I'd have to, I need to refer to my book,
Okay.
but it's the Andell.
Okay. Well, based on what I understand from the variances requested plus the map shown here, you're going to be building quite a number of 4-story buildings that are going to be fronting on the Kiowa Island Parkway. To me, this appears to be the makings of a small co-op city in the middle of our very traditional town with low landscapes, low buildings. This is going to be a monstrosity. It's going to be huge buildings fronting up on Kiowa Island Parkway. And they're going to overshadow Cacique. They're going to overshadow Freshfields. It's going to be a disaster.
I guess you're the last one, man. Oh, I take it back.
My name is Susan Cottrell, 267 Seymour's Drive. I have heard, and I agree, that the Goodwin family has done a marvelous job with the aesthetics of Kiowa Island. What I can't get my head around is why don't they continue doing their marvelous job and finish the project at West Beach and do something with the Kiowa Island Inn before embarking on this project. I can't get my head around leaving a project unfinished. And when Roger Warren had the Zoom meeting earlier this year, he said very specifically that it was going to have to be delayed for various and sundry reasons. Well, are those various and sundry reasons still there, and they've just been shoveled off, and now we're going to go off into another project? That is my concern. I think you've done a wonderful job, but I think that is very, very glaringly unfinished.
John Zalogar again. I just kind of wanted to summarize. I was going to be the last person. 5528 Frisco Lane. Just wanted to summarize again, I think what I've heard from folks, just to make sure the developers have heard it. And I think the first thing is there needs to be a lot more public input, as opposed to we have this meeting and you go away and suddenly there's this huge document that the council's going to vote, or the planning commission is going to vote on. So I don't know if there needs to be a second or a third or a fourth workshop, but I think you all need to come back here with a lot more details. I'm very used to working with the county and in dealing with planning PEs there. I would have seen a lot more details at this point in time, and certainly a lot more detail before it gets to the point that it gets voted on. So I would hope there'd be at least a second, perhaps third or fourth workshop. Second, there's a fundamental question, and I don't live in Kiowa, but you all got a fundamental question about annexing. And that definitely needs to be addressed. I know it's outside of your perusal, but how this is intertwined, some gentlemen asked about the process and what comes first and what comes second. I think you all need to really talk with your mayor and council and understand that whole process in terms of the annexation. The density, number of houses. I think you really need to keep it at 288 or less. The colleague's suggestion that there's a lot of space for open space. You were talking about, someone mentioned about how we keep Kiowa, how we keep Kiowa natural. We're talking about, that's the entrance to the island, yet we're putting grocery stores there. I mean, that seems like a great place to put natural, open space and so forth as part of that. So more public input, why annex, keeping the number of dwelling units to 288, and keeping Kiowa natural. Did I miss anything, guys? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
I'm Roger Warren. Since my name was taken in vain, I thought I'd come up here and just make a comment. I'm at 8 Sand Alley here on Kiowa.
I didn't take your name in vain.
I know you didn't, Susan. I know it. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for all the positive comments today about the Goodwin family, the focus on attention to detail and quality. I think that does reflect very consistently what the family looks to do and has done here on Kiowa. And Susan, I'm here because you mentioned West Beach and the Zoom meeting and the time that's transpired. And I'd like to spin it positively and say that all we've said is about how the Goodwin family takes a lot of time to do it in detail. And that's what's happening at West Beach. And I know, Lord knows, I know better than anybody how long it's taken to get through this process. But the reason it's taken so long is conditions have changed. We've gone through a pandemic. We've gone through a huge change in the cost of construction in this area. There are a lot of things, a lot of factors that have changed, but not the desire and not the commitment to do what we're going to do at West Beach. And we're still working on it. I believe we're getting closer. And And so I think it's important that everyone understand that that is really a reflection of the commitment of the Goodwin family to do it right. And when it gets done, I think you'll be as proud of what's going to go down in the West Beach former Inn site as we've done with all the other building we've done on the island over the years and most recently. And so I just wanted to answer that and not leave it hanging out there.
Thank you, Roger. Sir.
My name is Arthur Glode, 5508 Turtle Cove. I have 4 observations and comments. I spent a month on that piece of property during the PGA tournament, working to certify the trucks that are coming and going. And I saw birds, I saw deer, I saw snakes. All that is going to be covered up and pushed into other parcels. It's second observation. It's interesting we're having this meeting now, after Labor Day. Why not before Labor Day when more residents were available to come to the meetings and voice their concerns? And a project like this doesn't go ahead without a financial feasibility study, a market study, and a financial feasibility study. You can't borrow money from lenders without a financial feasibility study. Where's the feasibility study, financial feasibility study? We should be looking at that. And that would have certain assumptions, how much the buildings are gonna sell for, what the rents will be, what the occupants will be. We should look, somebody should look and require a look at a financial feasibility study and a market study. Last comment, 500 units. Typical negotiation discussions in books right now is come in with a high number, and then when you get approval for, people think they got something done by getting a lower number. Wow, we got something done here. We went from the 500 to the 288. Well, that's a ploy, and I think it's something we should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am.
Good afternoon. Glenda Miller, 3377 Cottage Plantation. I'm in opposition to the annexation because it appears to me the annexation's plot is to double the number of units on the property. Also, the commercial space, there's commercial space at Freshfields, as we all know, and there's planned commercial space at Kiowa River. So I'm not convinced that we need additional commercial and retail space other than the grocery store. And third, if we do increase this to 500 units or more, I really think since traffic is an overwhelming complaint in this area, particularly Kiowa, that we need to consider a portion of those as affordable housing and storage for workers, equipment, and supplies.
Okay, I guess we've heard from the public. Mark, did you want to make some more comments, or? Or do?
Well, there's more information if you'd like to go through this, or I could simply refer everyone to the additional exhibits. So why don't I just give a quick outline, and then we can all agree to whether we continue the dialogue on the additional exhibits. Is that fair, Mr. Chairman? Okay. So first and foremost, we appreciate all the comments, both the ones that we've written down and the ones we've heard. They're aligned and consistent with many of the ones that we started to hear yesterday, with the potential for having today's venue. So much appreciated. There are a couple of other technical requirements of the Plan Development District. Maybe what I'll do is just focus on what those are, and then you can take advantage of the material that's handed out. And I would direct you to the bottom listing there, which is there are very specific technical requirements that, as a minimum, are required in the application. I've already mentioned a couple of these, that there has to be a plat of record. Let me just go through it. This first part is pretty basic and straightforward, the plat of record. We've heard you loud and clear that it would be helpful if the conceptual master plan was more informative and more expressive, and that's worthy of additional study. We mentioned the traffic study that has been submitted to the town for assessment. This F category is we've received letters. There's a requirement to show evidence of primary service providers that they can serve the property. So for example, Berkeley Electric can serve the property as proposed. Seabrook Island Utility Company, wastewater treatment, St. John's Utility District, I might have misnamed that, for potable water, and so forth. We've received all those letters. That's at a high elevation based upon the proposal of square footage and density count, and then that doesn't take away the responsibility as you go forward with the building permit process. There's more fine-grained attunement or alignment with provisions of that, but it meets the requirements to date. Now there are 3 additional exhibits that were piled up out here that, depending upon your propensity to continue the dialogue, let me just talk about the first one. Let me talk about the first one because it's not up on the screen, which is there is a document that was handed out that the cover is called warmly Division 3 Use Regulations. That's the list of potential uses that might be considered in this new category. It's a custom zoning category, plan development related to Andell West. I would suggest you go through those, review them. What we've tried to do is align those to be exactly like what's Freshfields. So Freshfields Village, which was originally approved through the rezoning process with the county and then annexed by the town, but with some additional changes to the uses, we've tried to align the uses to be just like Freshfields Village in terms of what those categories are. Now the next one, there are 2 categories, zoning classifications. So what happens is when you choose to do one, like commercial, if you notice that commercial area, when you choose to do the commercial zone, then you're required to, you're required to meet these standards. So when you look at that document that was the handout and you see the red text, that is the proposed, that's the proposed text for Andell West. In this category, specifically, like setbacks down here where you go, what the heck? You go from 25 to 0? Those setbacks are exactly like Freshfields Village setbacks. So in the commercial category, again, the alignment was to have it consistent and compatible with the standards for Freshfields Village. In the next category, the R3, so when you make a choice for the residential component, you then are aligned with the standards associated with the R3 category. And in a similar fashion, you'll see red text, and I'm going to point out too that would be obvious that you would raise your hand and say, why are you suggesting this? The first one being the number of units within a building. That is being proposed to be up to 24 dwelling units in a building. That is not to say every building is going to have 24 units in it. It's to establish, excuse me, a limit to allow for those buildings that might in fact go to 4 stories. So building upon the experience that Riverstone has in other parts of the country with multifamily, that's where that figure came. On the next page of the R3 category, you'll see, again, red text in certain categories of different types of different types of residential for front, side, rear, setbacks, and maximum height. So again, those are aligned with, there was one question about the height being 4 stories. I'm trying to think of the gentleman that asked, when you asked the question, what's the tallest building on Kiowa and so forth, we didn't measure this standard by the last building at Windswept, which is, I think, 6.5 stories tall, or the Sanctuary. Those were different setups. The more recent activity that you're familiar with of 4 stories, essentially 4 stories over parking, are the more recent buildings that you're aware of on Kiowa. Didn't mean to go there. So again, I'll open it up for questions, but I would urge you strongly in this process, recognizing that this isn't the only session we're going to have together. Assess it, simmer on it as you dwell on it, make notes, share those with, I'm going to put John on the spot here, share those with the town in terms of additional thinking that you have about those different standards going forward. So at that point,
I'm sorry, can you press the 12 units per acre there?
I'm sorry?
12 units per acre.
Right, and you'll see a note right here, right there. You see, I had a note to myself to verify what the allocation was. So I think that's going to be adjusted based upon additional studies, not just what we're proposing, but alternative studies that we might consider.
Mark, if I read this correctly, that you're proposing that the multifamily buildings would be 55 feet, which is 20 feet taller than anything in Freshfields currently?
Well, I need to check Freshfields. Can I?
Current restriction is 35 feet.
35, I think it's, 3.5 floors. 3.5 floors, right. So the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the commercial matches Freshfields, correct?
I'm sorry.
Proposing 5 feet, but the multifamily, it looks like you're proposing 20 feet higher than anything in the adjacent Freshfields.
Right, and there are, if I may comment about that, there are 2 lessons learned, one more recently on Kiowa and a little bit of what we learned at Freshfields. When I say we, the Kiowa partner we learned that in the evolution of the Andell Inn, and to a lesser extent the senior living, that the height limit that was established for those 3 floors, and I'm going to focus on the 3 floors, okay, is that when you look at the floor-to-floor dimension that is more typical of how buildings are built now for occupancy, that by the time you get to where the peak of a roof would be, the roof was almost flat. So the idea was, now clearly we're recommending an increase in floor height, a number of floors, but the idea is to also account for architectural expression, to have more form for how the roof, how the building meets the sky. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but it's more an architectural allowance. So for example, in West Beach, with the development agreement that we have with the resort, there was an adjustment to how that might be considered to allow for architectural expression, so that you didn't just push all the floors up and then just sort of almost clip it off. I don't know if I answered your question, but it was an intentional sort of allowance for the additional floor, but then also an allowance for a little bit more expression on form.
Clearly, you could address the architectural aspect by removing one of the proposed additional floors.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I'm just, what I was trying to express is a component of the increased height wasn't just literally the additional floor, but it was also the additional expression. I do want to point out that, although it's not clarified in this, the request or proposal for 4 floors as opposed to 3 floors, which is in Freshfields, is the intent is not necessarily that all those buildings are 4 floors. It's to allow for contrast. to allow for contrast of some buildings with 4 floors, some with 3, and then obviously the townhomes would be a different category on that. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned, I think if I heard you correctly, that this is high elevation. Did I hear you say, did I mishear you on that? I'm
The
wondering-
topo?
Yes, the high ground for the, do you know what the elevation above the mean high water line is? for this
I'd have to check the survey of it.
Okay, I was
If I had to guess, based upon just sort of general observation, it's probably in the 6 to 9 feet mean sea level. The majority of it is in that because of how it's been tilled. What I don't remember is over time, because of how farming can sort of tilt the land, it might go as high as 10. But in general, it's not unlike Kiowa. Kiowa is generally 6 to 9 feet mean sea level.
Yeah, if y'all would be willing to include some of that information in the, and what you pointed out you're going to be including in future meetings and packets, I think it would be helpful for people to understand the elevation as well as some of the NOAA sea level rise projections.
Right, yeah. When you're talking about their floodplain requirements, right? Yeah,
Well, different
flood
from the
elevation.
FEMA. I think it's in an AE flood zone according to FEMA,
Yeah.
which only takes into account storm surge. So if there's a way to help people understand some of the risks that we experience here locally with rainfall flooding,
Right.
and also just sea level rise, high tide flooding. that
Sure, we can provide that base information and how we translate that into what so therefore, right, what does it mean in terms of where finished floor elevation requirements are? Uh-huh.
Thanks, Mark. I think perhaps I'll, ma'am, come up to the podium, please. Thank you.
Jill Bushkoff again, Salthouse Lane. The one thing that's never really been discussed is the fact that we're talking about raising the zoning level, but we're not taking into account that we're actually taking land away for commercial. So usually when you have a site that's a residential site and you separate it for some of it for commercial, your number of residents should go down, not be doubled. And if you look at the site plan, it looks like about a fifth or a sixth of the property is going to be commercial, dedicated commercial. So your zoning is actually going, we're talking about, the real number we're talking about is greater than the number that's been thrown out because all of this space isn't residential now.
If I may, I think I said this earlier on, that, and if I didn't, I apologize. When you take the extremes of the proposal of 100, let me put them back up. Of 160,000 square feet of commercial and 500 dwelling units, like almost every parcel on Kiowa, I'm just going to use Kiowa as an example, where you have contrast in those. You can't do both of those on the site. You have to make choices. That is, if you choose to go to the extreme of 160,000 square feet of commercial, you reduce the number of residential units. If you choose to top out the residential units, you have to reduce the commercial. Now, how much you reduce it or modify it, that's all the alchemy of conceptual master planning at that moment. So that is a familiar part of the process on Kiowa, and I can show you parcel by parcel. For example, we were talking about West Beach. West Beach allowed for X number of hotel rooms, and it also allowed for X number of residential units. You couldn't top out both of those. You have to make a choice. And when you make a choice, then you're governed by those standards. So this is really an important factor. Am I communicating right? And as I said, I'd have to show you example after example on Kiowa.
But it seems that you're topping out the residential, you're going more than the residential allowed
No, what I'm saying is you set parameters, like Freshfields that set the parameters. Freshfields set the parameters of 480,000 square feet of commercial, 200 residential units, and 100 hotel rooms. You cannot do all of that. In fact, let me give you the stats. Hang on. I was waiting for this question. So, to date, Northwoods, and I don't know if we still have a Northwoods person in the room, but Northwoods was allocated, now remember, I'm starting at 480,000 square feet of retail sales and services, commercial, at Freshfields. Northwoods was allocated 227,500. Let's round it to 228,000. The Andell Inn was allocated 72,000 square feet. The senior living, yet to be built, was allocated 140. Now, I would argue that the Andell, even though they were allocated commercial square footage, they aren't classic retail sales and services. The senior living is residential more. So that leaves, at the end, you can't do any more than 40,000 square feet of classic retail in Freshfields Village. And there's barely room to do that. But when you add it to what any of us in this room would consider of classic retail sales and services, which is the Northwoods property, that's 228,000. So it's well below 480,000 square feet of retail because of the choices that you made. So what I'm trying to say, it's a math word problem, because this proposal, similar to most planned development districts, builds in flexibility of choice. You can't do both. You can't meet all of those technical requirements of ground coverage and setbacks and everything else. Have I confused? Have I confused you more? What?
You have this math word problem.
It is a math, no, it is a math word. It's a math word problem that lives out every day on parcels at Kiowa. It's not abstract, it's literal on that. There is one thing I'd like to add to the question. Can I just add something for just a minute? I think he left. The gentleman that asked the question about height. Oh, no, I'm sorry, yeah. He mentioned 35 feet in Freshfields. It's 55 feet, by the way, just so you know.
Existing structure, the highest existing structure is 55.
Yeah, that's the technical allowance in Freshfields.
The allowance or the actual height of it?
And Andell Inn and the senior living approaches that. Yeah, so I wanted to clarify that point. I'm sorry.
Mr. LaPuma, would you like to make a comment?
If I may.
As we all know, on Kiowa,
Charlie.
I'm sorry.
No, let us know who you are.
The name is Charles LaPuma, 201 Horn Grebe Court. I'm sorry. We all know that as members of the community association, that we pay an annual assessment, and the town is not responsible for maintaining any of the infrastructure or the landscaping inside the gates. We also know at Freshfields that Northwoods is responsible for maintaining all of the infrastructure and landscaping inside Freshfields. I haven't heard today what the thinking is with respect to this new 82-acre development, whether the plans are for the developer or whomever to be responsible for the landscaping and the infrastructure, or if that's going to be thrown onto the responsibility of the town. Has any judgment been made along those lines?
We would take on that responsibility.
you will take on that responsibility. Thank you. That relieves my concern.
Again, I'm used to the county, and I can just...
Sir, nobody can hear what you're saying.
John Slogar. I'm really used to the way the county does stuff, so I'm not used to the way that the town does it, so I'll admit that. But the county would definitely, and I can maybe understand why you're not going to the county, because this idea of trading off commercial for residential is somewhat unusual. So in other words, if you look at Kiowa River, they're going to max out on both commercial and residential. As a matter of fact, they just went for a PD about a year ago, a PD amendment to trade off some commercial for senior living. So they went in for as a PD amendment. So as that changes, there are PD amendments that come before the Planning Commission and allow the residents to respond to that change. So instead, it looks like what you're proposing is that you have these really, really high limits. So you don't have to come back to the Planning Commission and have public hearings relative to that. I would say you really need to think about what you want now, what you want this community to ask their Planning Commission to approve. And then if later on you decide you want to change something, go through the same process for that change, just like it's done in the county, as opposed to, as someone mentioned, you go in for really high number here and a really high number here. I mean, is it 500 and 160,000? Is it 288 and 100,000? Go in with your best shot. And if you want to do a PD amendment in the future, go before the Planning Commission and the public and do it. But right now, I think you really need to consider doing it the way the county does. And that is, you go in with your best shot at this point in time. And as market conditions change, you can go in for a planned development amendment.
Should this schematic say up to, instead of these gross numbers of units, where it says residential apartments, there's 450 developed units, should it say up to 450?
It can if it helps clarify the point. The only thing I would suggest, though, is I don't want to propose that for the townhomes, because there might be an increased number of townhomes and a reduction number of the other category. So that's the idea. As it relates to the county's process, I handled the rezoning for Freshfields before the county in 2005. And so I'm very familiar with the county's planning process too, in terms of how it's handled. And you know what? There's no reason why this process can't go through the county planning process either. But the question was raised yesterday about why the town versus the county. I would suggest the past 2 days are really great evidence of, and I think even if the county were listening to this amount of time dedicated to this conversation, and we know we're going to have more sessions like this, the county does not do that. The county has a shot clock on everyone that speaks. I mean, if you've been through the process, you know that they and I'm not saying that's awful. For every event or thing that we have on our council agenda, they have 15. For every person that's standing in front of you or sitting in front of you here, as well as the lady and gentlemen that were before you yesterday, there are neighbors. There's one elected official from our area on Charleston County Council. And I would ask the question, you don't have to raise your hand, do you know who that person's name is? I do. I know some people do. I'm just saying, I think I mentioned intangible yesterday, that there are no guarantees either process, but there are merits, and there is reasonable evidence of the nature of collaboration on really important things that you cannot write enough rules on. You know, in your area of expertise and the role that you play in advocacy, you can write enormous numbers of conditions, but in the end, you also can look a person in the eye and figure out a way to work out a solution. And I think that has merit to it. So this issue of annexation in or annexation out, all the other points I think are well worth consideration. The dissipation of voter percentages, and I get all that. But I don't want to end the day without us being at least aware of the nature of how decisions are made by all of us in our greater community. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Mark. Well, we've certainly heard a lot of great comments. I'm going to allow the commissioners, if they have any comments or questions. Gay, we could start with you.
I had submitted a list of questions. I think maybe you saw them. John had them, and I don't need to go through all of those here.
Okay. Okay. Bill Dowdy, do you have any comments at this time?
No, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and keep in mind the members of the town council and people sitting up here, what they have in common with you is we've all selected Kiowa to live because it's a special place. And for those of us up here and the members of the town council, we've taken on positions, these volunteer positions, so that we can play a personal role in keeping it a special place. So there's not a lot of difference between you, us, and our town council. We're all in this together. So rest assured that we listen, we hear you, and we plan to continue to listen and continue to hear you.
Thank you. Andy,
I'd reiterate some of the same stuff we've heard from Bill and certainly from the audience, or members here. I've heard a lot of consistency, clearly items that have to be addressed. And I look forward to getting maybe a more specific, if that's the position, of the plan development. We have a general outline. I don't think anybody here is in a position to tell you exactly what's going to be in the plan development document. We got to take a look at that. That's what we're going to have to pass on. So we look forward to seeing that, and to the extent we have further questions and have a further opportunity to get input, I'm sure we'll take advantage of it to the extent we can.
Any of the commissioners who are online have any comments?
I'll go ahead, Fred.
Thank you, Brett.
Again, great comments, good dialogue, and a good presentation. I am, like Andy says, I am looking forward to some more detail, in particular how we can address some of the things that the Coastal Conservation League raised about future wetlands encroachment, that kind of thing. It does seem to me that there are some opportunities here in clustering that maybe don't exist. And I should know this, I guess, but I don't really know if in Charleston County, if the R4 allows for some pretty substantial clustering, or whether it's just a minimum lot size that gets pretty much covers the entire site. But it does seem to me there's some opportunity for clustering here. I'd look forward to more detail on the conceptual plan. But I think, it was pretty well explained today. Maybe some more information about following up on Gay's question about the up to the number of units. Are these, I know you don't want to worry about the mix or determine the exact mix at this point, but is 500 units the maximum? I mean, the R3 allows a lot more units than that. So this plan development, if we can start to pin down a little more detail on the plan, I think that we'd be a lot further along.
Thanks, Brett.
It's Madeline.
Thanks, Madeline.
Hi, I have a real basic question around the benefits to Kiowa of increasing the density from 4 units an acre to 12 to 24. If somebody from the development team could give me some answers there.
Jeff's getting up.
Yes.
What are
What are your questions?
Yeah, what are the advantages to Kiowa of increasing the density from 4 units an acre to 12 or 24 an acre?
Well, the 12 to 24 is on any particular acre. That is not gross over the entire 80 acres. As we've shown in the plan that's on the slide deck, we've got caps on the number of units that would be on the 82 plus or minus acres.
But the benefits to Kiowa?
Our perception or our feeling, and we're pretty emphatic about it, is that we can make a place that is cohesively planned. We certainly could try to annex only the grocery store. We could attempt to do just the grocery store and R4 through Charleston County. We have a very strong working relationship with the town of Kiowa Island. As we've said, this is the front door to the island and our major investment on the island. We think this is an opportunity to plan something that doesn't exist in the by right zoning. And I certainly the density and the number of units, that seems to be an overriding concern, and I think that's something we are willing to work with the elected officials and citizens on. We have to start somewhere.
Thanks, Jeff.
Does that help?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think at a minimum, we're going to have at least one more workshop. It seems like the applicant needs to rework the application some, think about some of the things that have been said today. I think some specific details, even to what buildings might look like, would be helpful. And additionally, talk about setbacks from the Kiowa Island Parkway so that the view is not altered from landscape to the backside of buildings. Some of the things that do bother me. I think at this time, oh, I'm sorry, Andy.
If I might, just one other point. I think one of the issues we do have, and obviously it's been discussed throughout the day, is density in the residential side. It would be helpful to understand exactly what type of community we are looking to build. Not only what type, but who's going to occupy it? What do they need? Do they need a playground? Do they need a post office? Do they need opportunity to congregate? Whatever they need in that community, if it's going to be self-contained, it would be nice to have an understanding of that and how it's going to happen. And this is the very last point. Our comprehensive plan, it's been raised earlier, has already been amended to deal with sea level rise and marsh management. So if you're interested in what we're doing, I'd refer you to the comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Andy. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor of adjourning this workshop, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thanks.
Aye.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, folks, for coming.